their experience, personal experience, is something that we want to hear about. Um, we have in the other two meetings opened it up for questions with the folks that attended. And what, frankly, we had found is that people are not always ready to ask questions in public. One of the things that I would encourage you to do that uh, you can, and those who are listening in online, because we're a virtual presentation here this afternoon, is to write your questions down on the website. Any comments that you might have on our, you can weigh in on the website in that way. And we will be collecting and reading the comments as we have right along. The other suggestion I have for this afternoon is if you have questions, there are no cards up here, Scott, on the table there where Wendy is. Please feel free to write your questions down on the cards and we can take them that way. There's one other item I wanted to mention, and that is that the meeting here this afternoon is being recorded. Recorded by who, Scott, please?
Catamount Access Television.
Catamount Access Television. As I said, we have remote participants. You can see Judge Zone as one of them. Anyone who is joining us remotely online, if you have a question you want to ask, raise your hand. The people that are joining online are automatically muted until you do so, or offer your question up in the chat box. So, unless there are questions that folks have immediately for us, let me turn to my colleague here to introduce himself and Scott as well. And then what we can do is proceed with questions that we received from the audience at the Vermont Law School the other day. We had a session there Tuesday on Martin Luther King Day. And I have questions that the audience submitted, and that would be a way we could try to break the ice here this afternoon, so to speak. Yes, sir.
What about our questions?
I'm happy to take your
Make
questions.
ours first, so I can down.
All right, let's.
Not
let-
us.
Okay, hang on a second.
Hold on, Steve.
I'm sorry. Yeah, just hang on a second, okay? I think your question. Bill.
So
go ahead.
I'm Bill Cohen. I'm an associate justice on the Vermont Supreme Court. I practiced many years, not practiced, I was a judge in Bennington County for many years with Judge Howard, Judge Valenti, and some of the other judges. And this is actually a topic. I'm glad the Public Defender's Office is here. It's really sort of started with a lot of conversations with Susan McManus regarding race and juries and the court systems, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And so we are spending a lot of time and a lot of resources trying to make sure that that we get the proper information and the proper data. So my committee is the data committee, and we're looking at race and ethnicity.
Scott, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Griffith. I'm the Chief of Planning and Court Services in the Court Administrator's Office with the Judiciary.
Okay, thank you. Judge Zone, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge.
Thank you, Tom. I'm sorry?
Susanna.
Susanna Davis. Susanna, will you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Susanna Davis, the Racial Equity Director for the state.
Thank you. Is there another member of the commission that's on the feed? I can't tell.
Aaron.
I believe
I'm
Aaron.
sorry.
I believe Aaron Jacobson.
Aaron. Aaron, will you introduce yourself, please? Well, that's not Aaron.
It's not Aaron.
Oh, I'm okay, great. For a moment there, I was not able to unmute myself, and now the host has kindly unmuted me. So thank you, host. My name is Erin Jacobson. I'm not a member of the Judiciary. I'm a member of the Attorney General's office.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, so, we've lost the, I'm sorry?
Judge Arms raised her hand.
She,
Oh, is there, is
Judge Arms.
Allison, would you please introduce yourself? Thank you. Judge Arms. We'll get there. It's a slow moving target.
I was locked out. I couldn't unmute. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
and Allison, Judge Arms, did you just say what your role is and how you're participating?
Yes, certainly. I'm a Superior Court judge. I'm in the Chittenden Criminal Division, and I am part of the Commission on Justice Cohen's subcommittee regarding data. Thank you.
Okay, so I was going to turn to my friend here who had a question, but he's not here now. Do any of you have questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is part of your presentation, but this afternoon, could you speak to us a little bit about bail reform?
Well, that is something that is within the scope of what the legislature does. I think they have a committee that's looking at that right now. In fact, I think Judge Zone is probably involved with that. Tom?
The issue of bail has been discussed in several committees, and that's something that I would expect to see more action on in the legislature this session in different areas.
What is it that they're considering, Tom? Can you be any more specific?
It's come up in a number of different committee meetings that I've been in, where people have asked about bail. For instance, next week I'm going to be speaking with one of the committees on how bail works and giving a presentation so they understand it. So I think the idea is to get a better understanding of how it currently works so they can also take steps to determine what changes may be appropriate going forward.
Did you have a certain perspective on that, sir?
No, I just wanted to know if you did. I mean, if
Well, it's a political.
on what needed to be done. I mean, I've just heard about it, so.
Yeah, it's a political question. It's a question for the politicians to decide. I suppose at some point there are issues that could come before the courts with regard to that. But I think that in the first instance where we are right now, it's really a political question for the folks in Montpelier.
Okay, thank you.
And the topic I'm going to be discussing today will be discretionary decisions that the judiciary makes, which is going to start with bail.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead, Bill?
No, I'll wait. Let's go down. Is there another question?
Yeah, okay.
So state of Vermont, obviously, it's becoming more and more diverse as time goes on.
Yeah.
As such, like, I believe institutions should reflect this diversity. So my question really would be, like, what is the judiciary doing in particular to make sure that the state of Vermont's judiciary is reflective of its population? I'm not trying to add shade or would point out the obvious.
No, that's all right.
Very difficult for a state to be representative of its individuals, and all of the individuals of one demographic.
No question.
Yet the state is honestly not that anymore.
Yeah.
So like, I would love to hear what the state of Vermont is doing in particular to make sure that that shortcoming or challenges, however you want to bring it, is being looked at and addressed, because we cannot have a judiciary that's required to monolithic.
Yeah, this is a question that came up at the law school as well. One of the things that we talk about frequently is the diversity on the bench. What is our experience with diversity on the bench? Judges. And one of the concerns about expanding the diversity on the bench, just as you are suggesting, is if we don't have more diversity in the bar itself to begin with, we cannot achieve the sort of diversity on the bench that we'd like to see. So one of the things that our committees are considering are more defined measures to address, even high school students, college students about the advantages of going to law school, becoming lawyers, but trying to plant the seed with younger people, frankly, like yourself, to aspire to that sort of. I'm sorry. To aspire to that goal. Yeah.
Justice Waples is here now. She's the first person of color to be on the trial court and also on the Vermont Supreme Court. And so the question was, what are we doing to create greater diversity within the judiciary? And you've had some great ideas and things that you're working on. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, please.
But
Well, thank you, and my apologies, everybody, for being late. It's snowing pretty hard up in Wallingford area. So, in terms of the judiciary, that's part of the goal of the committee that I chair.
This young man here had the question.
Hi
Nancy.
there.
Yeah.
The committee that I chair is the Administration and Operations Committee. And our objective is to do surveys within the judiciary and engage in new employee recruitment, screening, and selection. We'll also be doing employee and judicial training on implicit bias. I mean, we've done it already, but we are continuing to engage in that type of training. We're also designing certain court programs, which Scott will really take the lead in as a program director for delivery of court services. One of the things the judiciary did, even before the creation of this commission, was to have a language access program. And because there is a robust resettlement program in this state, we have translated court documents in the family court, as well as some on the, well, it has started pretty much in the family court, and then there'll be some in the criminal courts, translation of court documents into about 15 different languages that we have now. We're, advertising for judicial positions, employment in the staffing of the courts through some of our less traditional places. For example, I think we're going to start in some of the newspapers that are common in the, or is the newspaper source for some of the immigrant communities. We'll be advertising, translating those employment opportunities. So, I mean, we're here. We've been engaged in this work before the creation of this commission, and of course, these forums are the chief's idea, which is a great idea, to seek public input as to what else we can be doing. So.
Thanks, Nancy.
Sure.
Yep. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Rick Ryder from Bennington, Vermont. My question is to Justice Cohen. Justice Cohen, were you getting stock options and paid by Jams and the AFC when you sat on that historic lesbian case?
excuse me?
Were you getting paid by Jams and the AFCC?
I don't even know what JAMS is.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
Is this related to?
It's related to what happened to Colvin's trial? Were you tipped off to a federal investigation?
I have no idea.
Well,
Yeah, you do.
Okay. Leave everything.
Thank you, that's all I wanted to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Okay, another question? Yes, ma'am, please.
Hi, my name is Susan McManus. I'm one of the public defenders here in Bennington.
Oh, nice to see you. Thanks for the work you do.
One of my questions is regarding diversity, specifically on the bench.
Yeah.
How do you try to address that with the current the current system that we have in place with the nominating committee, where the nominating committee submits the names to the governor, and the governor actually selects the from the applicants that are sent up to him. It's not, it's kind of well known within the bar that this particular governor seems to have a penchant for prosecutors. But a diverse bench means not only diversity from different cultural race backgrounds, but it also means from different professional experiences. And it might be nice to have perspectives on the bench from people who come from criminal defense backgrounds. So I'm wondering if the judiciary is doing anything, communicating with the governor's office or things like that to try to get judges on the bench who come from different backgrounds other than being prosecutors.
Well, you know, the bar just elected its 3 representatives that are on the Judicial Nominating Board. Sarah Vangel is one of the individuals who was elected. Sarah is in Brattleboro, I know, but and I'm not exactly familiar with what her practice area is. She's one of the people that has been elected to it just now. Ella Spotswood, who is in the prosecutor's office, I acknowledge, in the Attorney General's office, was elected as the at-large member. And Ella has chaired that board before and actually took over the chairmanship of the board after a number of us, myself included, expressed concerns to the governor. And the governor had his own concerns about the way in which the board was qualifying individuals, requiring essentially a litmus test for attorneys who were not trial lawyers per se. So we talked about that. We actually had a big meeting in the State House with legislators about that. This is a few years ago. But as a result of that, the composition of the board changed dramatically, I think, in part because you guys in the Bar Association yourselves were dissatisfied with what was happening. So my answer to you would be, get involved. You know, these are 2-year stints that folks are elected to on that nominating board. You should think seriously yourself about becoming involved and running for that position the next time it's up, which is, as I say, another 2 years. That is the best way to change it from the inside. As far as us talking to the governor about, we do talk about geographic needs that we have, because very frequently we wind up with no judge in a particular district of the state. And that is a serious concern. So we talked to him about that. But beyond that, once people are qualified under the law, this is not our rule, this is what the law is. Once people are qualified by the board under the law, it's the governor's prerogative. And that's a political question. Again, I have to say, it's a political question for him. If the voters do not like the appointments that he's making, you know, then the voters need to look someplace else. But I would say at the first instance, what you should, and I think your point's a good one, I think what you should be doing is gathering colleagues who are also in the public defender's office around the state and putting somebody up to run at the next election cycle, which is 2 years down the road, less than 2 years now.
Chief, I think Susanna had some.
Yeah, Susanna, please.
Yeah, thank you. I prepared some thoughts about diversity on the bench, and I knew I was going to ramble, so I put it on this post-it. I can't say more than that. But in the interest of time, I'll just cut down to the small bit that I was going to say about this particular question, which is that the process through which judges are selected for consideration for the bench and sent to the governor's office is an important one. And yet the important considerations here happen a few steps before the gubernatorial selection part. So one of the things that we did last year, the Office of Racial Equity, was we introduced what we were calling an equity package. It was H401. It had a number of different provisions in it on a wide range of topics, but one of them was a section that dealt with the JNB and that would have A, changed the composition of the board, and B, would have changed the criteria used to examine attorneys who are in the state. For example, we know that minimum years of practice that are required, not just in general, but also specifically in Vermont, tend to exclude attorneys who may be younger, who may have started their careers later in life. Not to say that they don't have experience in the legal world, but maybe they only became attorneys fewer years ahead of time. It also excludes attorneys who haven't been in the state for as long, right? And if we want to diversify the state and expand the population, it means also allowing people to come from outside of the state to have that opportunity. Another thing that it would have done was to allow for more criteria to be considered. For example, the benefit to the diversification of the bench that a particular candidate would pose. This is also important and related to another criterion that would have changed, which is the nature of practice. A lot of times, attorneys who tend to have a lot of trial experience are favored for consideration, but we know that most cases don't get resolved at trial, and even the ones that do, we're talking about attorneys who, if you're going to be first chair or second chair on a case, it's very likely that you are an attorney who is male or white or affluent or came from a prestigious institution. And so by relaxing some of those standards, it also creates an environment where we can have more and newer and different attorneys on the bench. So I think that those are some of the early considerations, but there's also a much more broad and a much more systemic pipeline that needs to be supported as well. Because again, JNB is only picking from an existing pool of people who have already navigated their way into a profession that has largely excluded people who look like me or who are of my gender for many years. So for example, the things that would attract people to make an inclusive bench or an inclusive profession are really the same things that would attract for any other profession, right? Housing, pay, schooling, and the access to education, free of admissions bias, right? Because the higher up in higher ed you go, the fewer people there are who look like, well, me. Is it a rewarding career, right? And then things that are unique to the bench include safety is always a consideration for people who are going to be in Vermont, who may be not from the dominant groups, but especially if you're going to be in a profession like that. What are we able to do to protect people? Again, we talked about admission, the high cost of education in the first place. We know that people who come from low-income areas, people who come from communities of color are less likely to be able to take out loans, to be approved for loans. We know that credit scores are a scam that were invented in 1983, so we are the guinea pig generation, and somehow that's supposed to mean you can't borrow $100,000 for school. We also know that representation itself doesn't equal justice. People who are members of historically marginalized groups can also perpetuate individual and institutional and systemic bias. And so part of it absolutely is representation. But again, getting brown faces to uphold unjust systems is not quite the answer. We have to have a multi-sectoral approach that also revises and updates law to be more just and more inclusive. So I think it really is an interdisciplinary approach. We are going to be reintroducing that provision from H401 because the legislature didn't move it last year. So that's one step that we can say we're concretely taking this session. Thank you.
You know, one of the things I might add, thank you, Susanna, is that a number of years ago, it was quite common for lawyers to serve in the legislature. This is not very common these days. And I think that's one of the things that the state has lost as a result of a lower participation from the bar in the lawmaking part of the democratic system. But thanks for the question. I think we all are concerned about that. That's one of the reasons that we formed this effort that we're undertaking here. There is not a simple answer to the problem, but certainly we have got to be talking about it and listening to you and to others who have a very important perspective. So there was another hand. Yes, ma'am.
And this is the operation assistant. We do have some more questions from the remote participants as well.
Okay, thank you. Hold off on that, please. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Mia Schultz. I'm the president of the Rutland area NAACP.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. I'm here with my partner, Sean Pratt, who is also on the Criminal Justice Council. More importantly, he's one of the pinpoint people that people of color, Black people in particular, contact when they are involved in the criminal justice system.
Yep.
Find themselves in court and they find themselves in these walls.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we are not really addressing, have not said, is the historic and present issues, or using the term very lightly, issues with African Americans in particular. And this state is no exception from the country, as we are, like, even the statistics and the imprisonment statistics in particular. And it's great to understand that we are making accessibility options for immigrant communities as we see those communities bolster, but we also have an African American population here who has problems with communication, right? We have a communication and language problem. We have a power, and oftentimes we find people like Sean in different places along in Vermont who provide sort of like a translation service, right? He provides, he interprets, he explains the rules, the processes, because quite frankly, the attorneys, even the defenders, are not really skilled in that. And he's doing that for free. And we see a lot of, we see advocacy services in place for victims and for people with disabilities and for other places where people have problems accessing the law, accessing what they're going to access. He provides that in his way that he can. And I'd love to see more discussion where we can pay somebody to do that. Because quite frankly, we're all doing it for free. And we're doing it without any tools. And we're doing it at the risk of our own personal safety as well.
So the whole purpose of coming and doing these community outreaches is to hear information like that, so that we can get involved, that we can help, that we can try to come up with a system that actually provides additional services that you're talking about. If that's something we're missing, we're coming to the communities to try to find out what are we missing and how do we help it. And so if there's anything we can do or anything on that, and he said this is going to be part of when we're going to get together again with the whole group. It's a fascinating subject that needs some addressing, and we're committed to doing this.
So, Ms. Schmeltz, I'm sorry.
Go.
Something that we are doing, that we did before even the creation of this commission, was through our court services programming. Again, the ombudsman will be Scott, is the Access Resource Center, which we hope to have in every courthouse in the state. Our pilot project will be in Burlington, should be up and running in about 8 months.
A little longer.
A little longer, right at this point. In any event,
Describe how it works.
Right, I will, Chief. And what the Access Resource Center will be staffed with judiciary members who will have a objective helping mostly pro se people navigate the legal system in the state, in the family courts, and a lot of those will involve the relief from abuse orders, as well as ultimately the criminal courts if they have basic questions before they have an attorney. So that is something that we are engaged in.
And I appreciate that, and I would counter that with the trust factor and the power dynamics, and having somebody who is trusted in the community be part of that process, because of the historical and present distrust between the community. And so that's all that I'm like. I understand the process that you're going through, and I would add one extra element, which is involve the people who are trusted.
So would you suggest, for example, and I think that's an excellent idea, would you suggest then in every community in our courthouse, when the Access Resource Center is in operation, that we as the judiciary should reach out to the local community and find their local leader, somebody who also would be willing to at least participate in some forums and speaking and introducing the program, the pilot programs to the community.
And helping with additional
Yeah,
pieces. I would say
that's
being
great.
part of online and paying.
Right.
Because quite frankly, yeah, we do it for free.
Right.
But paying those people and that's your bridge.
Okay.
That's
Chief,
your
can
bridge
I
to communication. So
speak
that
to
was
this
what I
one,
would-
please?
No, go ahead.
This is such an important question because I think what it points to is that there are points of engagement that the courts have with people that exist outside of spaces like this, and courts around the country and in Vermont now are thinking hard about that and thinking about ways to create those spaces where people can come, not to get legal advice, but to get information, to do what you do. The trust issue is a really, really big issue. Getting around that requires things that we're doing, but quite frankly, we need to do more and we need to do better. We are doing a couple of things that I think are in direct response to this. We're hiring people whose job it is to meet people where they are, speaking the language that they, facilitating, making sure that we can communicate with them speaking the language that they speak, whether the language issue is one that relates to one that isn't English, somebody doesn't speak English, or it's dealing with the lack of understanding that someone has about the process. So the idea of demystifying that and giving people safe spaces to do that is something that is a priority for us. And I think you can expect to see some tangible improvements in the way we do that, because it shouldn't fall. I think everyone would agree that we're so grateful that there are community leaders who do what you do, but it shouldn't just fall to you. The judiciary has some responsibility for doing that. It's a great question.
And I would also say, I tried to bring people here. I did. Coming through this building, through the security, through the thing, and I get it. I understand why you do that. But that's gonna be a big deterrent. So when you consider more community conversations, how can we incorporate the best of both?
So this is the first one we've done in a courtroom. The first two in Chittenden County were done. One was done at a public center, and one was done at the library. So this is a work in progress. And if it's intimidating to come through and go through the security and go through all the rest of the stuff, and again, this is something that we need to know. 4 o'clock, is 4 o'clock the right time? We figured 4 o'clock would be better than 6 o'clock because we were having, we want to get the community involved. We want to get the community here. So these are discussions we have on a very regular basis.
What would you say about the access through the internet for folks you're talking about, people that you're concerned about?
Understood.
What would you say about that? Is that an accessible thing for those folks?
I think it increases accessibility, but also there's still a participation level that's missing. Like, there's nothing like being able to see seeing each other, being able to read your body, like being able to trust you through a screen that is not.
Right.
And you feel very, I would imagine if I were in that screen, one of those little boxes, I would feel very disconnected from the rest of the room.
Sure,
So.
yeah. Well, one of the things you're talking about that I actually testified this morning in the House Judiciary Committee. And I talked to them about the importance of peer support for people who are in our system. There are many states, and most of them, this is what I told them, that most of the states that have these robust peer support systems are in the West. Texas, Oklahoma, they actually are doing what you're suggesting, which is they've institutionalized peer support in a way so they actually have training. They have training, something you mentioned, training and financial remuneration. These are things that those courts are doing. Why they are so far ahead of the states on the East Coast on this, I don't know. But I'm very interested in that perspective. And I'll say one other thing to you. In New York State, one of the things that they started there several years ago was something called the ambassador system. And the ambassador system actually uses colleges and schools to train those folks to come into court and do exactly what your partner is doing in a formalized way. Not giving legal advice because that would
Right.
violate certain rules that we operate under, but rather helping people to understand if you're facing an eviction, so that you can tell somebody who's not represented by an attorney, listen, when the judge comes out, you need to make sure that he or she understands that you haven't had electricity in your apartment for the last 2 days. That's a very important thing for him or her to understand. That's the kind of thing that these ambassadors are doing in New York State. And we've been talking about this, and this is something that's going to be considered by our commission. Maya, is it?
Mia.
Mia, I'm sorry. Mia, thank you so much for coming. Really, thank you both. I really appreciate you coming, and I know coming into a courthouse is intimidating for. It's intimidating for a lot of lawyers too. So it's good.
And judges too.
Right. Oh, hang on a second. I'm going to take new hands before I come back to you. Okay.
I just was going to answer your question about the internet and the
Okay. All right. Shoot.
just in our experience using WebEx over the last couple of
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
There's a marginalized portion of society that doesn't appear on video over WebEx very routinely because they don't have access to internet.
I know. This
Their
is
connection
a
is
concern
great.
for me. Yeah.
So if the court is looking to do some sort of outreach like that, which I think is a great idea, I think the target audience isn't going to be reached adequately if that is a service that's provided.
Yeah, it's a really difficult problem. You know, one of the things that I've been talking about too is the medical community, I've read, has partnered with public libraries. Like Bill said, we did one of these in the city library in Burlington last month. But they partnered with the medical people have partnered with public libraries. So folks who don't have an iPhone, folks who don't have a laptop or access to, they can go into the library and they have a carol, a sort of a little, like a phone booth where you can get in and have privacy, and you can get on, you can log on, and you can communicate with a doctor or a physician or something like that. I think that would work for us, and that's actually what the ARC that Scott and Justice Waples were talking about. That's the idea that's what it's going to look like, is sort of a private space inside the courthouse on the ground floor where people can come in and with help, right? Somebody who's not in a robe, somebody who's not hopefully intimidating anyone, and the help would be, let me show you how to use the computer. Let me show, what do you need to do? What do you want to do? That sort of thing, and then walk away and let them access it in a private space. So anyway, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but.
And Chief, I just wanted to address that. So the ARC that I spoke about earlier is also leading a project to place surplus judiciary computers in public spaces, in libraries, in town halls, in community centers across the state. And that will provide technology for those who don't have the adequate cell service or the ability to afford a computer. And it will also connect them to Vermont legal aid services, as well as other legal services in Vermont through those surplus computers that will be provided by the judiciary.
That makes sense. Okay, so we'll take questions from the, what do you say, from the internet? I don't know.
Yeah, so we have a list. We have 3 people in the queue. So I'm going to go for the person who messaged first. So that will be Tina Cook. Just 1 second, and I'll pull her up. Okay, so Tina, you may ask your question.
Thank you. I'm in Bennington. I have more civil questions. Are you guys gonna do a lot more improvements in the civil court section? Because I'm seeing a lot of financial discrimination happening, and that to me seems to be like the weapon of choice in the state of Vermont. So
can you be more specific, Tina? Why you say it's the weapon of choice?
Because I am seeing a lot of BIPOC losing their homes to banks and the processes are not like, we have to be perfect in our fight in the courts, but they get so many opportunities to make mistakes, and they often do. And what I'm finding is that often the court clerks are not aware of the law, and they're accepting action in cases that violate the rules. So, that's a huge concern for me, but that's not the only place it's happening. And then also, it's very difficult to get representation because Vermont Legal Aid is, they're swamped. When you're waiting months and months to get a phone call back, how is that justice? So I'm concerned about the oversight. The lack of communication between the judiciary and the legislature is concerning because the legislature will bring down a rule, the judiciary doesn't follow it, and then it'll go get repealed, and then no one's the wiser. So
Can you be specific? Can you give me an example about
an
that?
example of is a foreclosure. So it not being submitted, all the paperwork submitted properly to the state. The state would have had much better insight had it followed its own rules, insight into the foreclosure crisis, the housing crisis, if it had followed its own rules and looked at the data. So so I've been very concerned about the fact that the state doesn't have insight into how this foreclosure crisis happened. And all they've got to do is just look at the data.
And the data you're referring to is what?
The Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. I've got actually some legislation out as well. So there was Act 0403 that almost 10 years of foreclosures that would probably be null and void because the proper documentation was not submitted.
Well,
by the banks or by the mortgage holders.
Correct. And then these cases were accepted by the court when they should not have been actionable.
So one of the areas that we're looking at, one of the things that I'm not sure which screen I should be looking at here, but one of the areas that we're looking at is foreclosures and landlord-tenant, obviously, and collection cases as being the areas where it needs some focus as to is there some are there numbers in those three dockets that are not acceptable? So that's something that it's part of. I know Judge Zone has been charged with that as well.
Tina, can you identify yourself? Are you an attorney?
I am not. I am not. I don't want to be an attorney, but I'm fine.
You sound like my kids.
We have to. We have to know the laws of the land under which we live because it is being used against us. And I see it as genocide.
I mean, it's painful to hear this, but as I tell the students and young people frequently, the whole purpose of us having laws, of rules that apply to the processes that we follow, is because everybody's supposed to be treated the same way under these laws. That's what equal justice under the law means. That's what it means. Is you have a law, you have a rule, it's in black letter, you can read it, and everybody, it applies to everybody the same way. It's not any different. Now, the proof is in the details, though. And one of the reasons that we're here, and we're so happy that you're participating, is because, obviously there are issues and concerns that have to be addressed, and that's what we're trying to do. I would encourage you to weigh in on our website with any additional comments or information that you might want to provide, because it sounds like you've got an important perspective. And one other thing I'll tell you is, during the pandemic, I was in a meeting with the Attorney General of the United States, who expressed, this is a couple years ago, but it's during the pandemic, a serious concern out of Washington for exactly what you're talking about, that there would be a tsunami of foreclosures and evictions that would occur as a result of what we were going through. People had been out of jobs, etc. I think there still is that's going on. I think that's what you're speaking to, and it is part of what we need to hear about. And I appreciate you speaking up here this
Thank
afternoon.
you for your time today. But it's actually Vermont is being targeted, and so I love Vermont, and it's really upsetting that Vermont specifically is being targeted for its small size and it's our lack of technological experience here. And so, we're being targeted. And specifically, Black and Asian homes are the ones that are being targeted here in Vermont because, if they had targeted white homes, you guys would notice. But you're not going to notice it because it's BIPOC and people that are being targeted. Black and Asian specifically, exclusively, is in this case.
We're in Bennington. Where are you?
I am
Are
in
you
Bennington.
You're in Bennington as well?
I am. But I have lived
Okay.
multiple places here in southern Vermont. So,
Okay.
it's
right.
not just a Bennington issue, Bennington County. This is rampant throughout the United States. And so Vermont can be a leader by doing probably, I don't know, it depends on your level of tolerance for litigation, really, because the banks are going to fight it, or they're just going to settle. And that's what I'm seeing over and over and over again. They'll continue their bad actions just because we'll settle with them. There's no real consequence if you have money in the judiciary.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can we have the next question, please, from the internet or whatever it is I should be calling it?
Yes, just one second. So next up would be CRJ Kimberly. Let me pull them up. Okay, so Kimberly, you're currently unmuted.
Hi there. I'm sorry I can't get my camera to work. I'm trying.
That's all right.
Let me see here. So my question is, I wanted to kind of go back to what Mia and Sean were talking about with having the support in the courtroom for the access support for people that are pro se or different things. I'm wondering if it would be possible to have folks from your local CJC or, like in our case, the Center for Restorative Justice, be with that group that's supporting those folks, because typically we're very well known in the community and we are uniquely positioned to have access to people of every population. And we might be a jumping off point to really encourage people of color, any population, to want to participate and be supportive like Mia's talking about. Because I know, for example, when I'm in court on Mondays and people are there for arraignment, I can't give them legal advice, but they might not understand the process. So I can explain the process. I worked with a young man last week who was a person of color. English was a second language, and he just didn't understand the process. So I sat with him in the courtroom. We talked about it, and that really helped him out a lot. So I think that's a really important point that she made, and I'm wondering if a local CJC, the one in Burlington, the one down here, might be a place, a good partnership that we could really make this work really well.
Was that
CJC, Community Justice Center? Right?
Yeah.
So was
yeah,
that?
sorry.
So did this person ever?
Oh yeah.
Just to know that for people like myself to be able to communicate with people like myself, because when I was a person that got in trouble a lot within the system, right? And it took me a while to really understand how things go, but I think once I figured it out and knew what to look at, I can understand it better. And from there on, I was able to really learn a lot more about myself and learn more about the system and how it's being run and how it's discriminatory towards me. So I'm able now to talk to those people that was like me, that didn't know anything, because a lot of these people don't want to come in these buildings. They don't want to. It's intimidating. They're afraid for whatever reason, right? So they need somebody like myself, right? Again, not saying that CRJ isn't, CRJ was there for me. I needed that. So, but again, even before, I've said that I can do this many times before, and it just went on deaf ears. But again, people like me are the only ones that can communicate with the people that are like myself, because they're more comfortable with me. We understand each other. I can use certain lingo. Again, we don't need to always have the educated person, right? You just need somebody that got heart and that really want to do it and that really cares about the community.
So I think one of the problems, and again, it's this cross-pollination. Prior to appointment to the bench, I was a criminal defense attorney for over 10 years. And I was a prosecutor before that, and then I was a criminal defense attorney, and the majority of my practice as a criminal defense attorney was representing indigent clients in federal court. And as an attorney, I appreciated the resources that you're suggesting, as well as the caller who called it, who's on the internet. From an attorney perspective, however, there are attorney-client privileges that are critical to your client's representation. And disclosures to a third party can breach an attorney-client privilege. I think maybe Ms. McManus the criminal defense attorneys here can speak a little more to that. But it is a fine line, and certainly not understanding the process, being intimidating, walking into a community majority white, the courtroom is mostly filled with white people, is very intimidating. But again, I think from a defense perspective, as a criminal defense lawyer, there is the concern of compromising your client's constitutional rights. So I don't know if anybody else who is here and whose practice wants to address that.
I'm Kate. I'm a public defender here.
Hi.
I guess Justice Waples, I would leave that up to my client. And my client wanted, Sean, for example, to be in a meeting with us so that he could help. Then I would consider that the client's decision to waive that small portion of confidentiality by having that person.
Would you want that person at the initial stage in the courtroom, though, talking to your client before you do?
I don't know about talking to my client before I do, but I often find it very helpful to have meetings with family members.
With them, yeah, I did that too,
so
often. Okay, all right, great, thank you.
I'm sorry, this will be the third time.
And again, it's not just so I need to hear everything they're saying. It's just to give support.
The comfort,
to
of course, yeah.
It's a trust issue. It's a trust issue.
I don't need to be all in it. If the person trusts me, then they're gonna talk to me and tell me all the things that they're going through, and how can they fix that or get away with it.
And briefly, Sean has come to an appointment before COVID with a client, and I, for that very reason that you raised, asked Sean politely if he would mind sitting out in the waiting room.
Right.
But he accompanied that individual to meet with me just up to that point, so I could have that confidential meeting. But at least that particular person, I think, felt a lot better knowing that Sean was there, even though he was in the waiting room.
Yeah. No.
Okay, thank you.
This is the operation assistant. It looks like Chief Aaron Jacobson just wants to make a comment.
All right, please.
Thank you. I'm not a chief, just a person who works at the Attorney General's office. I am an attorney, but I just wanted to second Kimberly's point about the opportunity that community or restorative justice centers present in terms of helping people access the justice system and understand it. I think it's true. They are really uniquely situated. They've done a really good job of establishing trust with communities, and they're working on the ground with the community members right alongside everybody. And they're not squarely within the justice system. They're adjacent. And, in my job, I think a lot about access to justice. And so I'm really excited about efforts like the Access Resource Center. But when you're asking questions about what does access mean, you're also thinking about what does justice mean. And I think that and that's another thing that community justice centers or folks like Mia and Sean can bring to the table, which is to have good conversations around what does justice look like for you, the individual. It might not mean that you want to go through, you know, the adversarial process that many systems and many proceedings are within the courts. Maybe there's another opportunity to resolve conflict. And so I think that, you know, that's another way we could be thinking about how do we increase equity and access and diversity in our justice system. Is also to think about what does justice mean, and maybe it doesn't always need to be adversarial. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Here we're talking about justice broadly, but it strikes me that most of the comments in a way are weighted towards the side of when a minority person is kind of in the defendant position. What strikes me over years of growing up and living here is that I feel quite in my rights as a tall, white, well-off man to go after making sure my rights are fully respected. I can imagine not feeling that it was going to be worth the hassle and the intimidation and the struggle to start a legal process on my own behalf if I didn't have the social attributes that I do. So I think that's part of these access questions is when somebody is a target of something to make sure that they're able to fully access everything in their defense, but also just to be able to initiate and carry through a whole representation of themselves in the judicial system.
So one of the issues involving data collection that we're looking at, which we really didn't know before, is that people are, if they're not in a position such as you are, that they're not going to want to put ethnicity or race down on any document because the perception would be that the playing field is not going to be the same for them. This is something we're trying to deal with and adjust, and so that we can get that, and not having the information could be just as important if people are refusing to give that because they don't think that the system will work for them. But that's something we're working on very strongly. Kate?
Justice Cohen, as part of the data collection, I'm just going back to this gentleman's question about bail. Is that something that the court is collecting data on, is whether or not bail does have a disproportionate impact?
Yes, and so we're starting with discretionary areas within the judiciary, not within the executive, which would mean a police pullover, which is part of the executive, the charging decisions that a state's attorney may make. We're going to look at it at the beginning of our system, which would be finding probable cause, bail, motions, jury trials, sentencing, and the like, to see where these are all within our lane, and that's what we're looking at. It's complicated because of risk of flight from people from out of state and the like. No contacts with Vermont. Those are the things that again it's part of our charge.
Yes.
I have a question. We were talking about peer support system. And one thing that I've noticed in my studies about the criminal justice system in Vermont is how we have a unitary system for jailing. I'm curious what the implications for that would be, because I know there was a story down about Bennington where a young girl who was a minor was being essentially housed in a jail, 2 hours away. So I'm curious, how can the court ensure that relationships exist between those that are incarcerated with the community that they're anchored in and that they live in? Because from what my understanding is, we don't have long-term jailing systems in southern Vermont, really. The closest one's Springfield, to my knowledge.
You will take that.
I think Mr. McManus should take that.
I think that's beyond my pay scale.
Ms. Mansfield?
Okay.
We're deferring, but.
So I'm not answering that question.
Oh, you're not? Oh, I was going to answer the question. Okay.
So I think I just want to understand the question, sir, and I have this podium blocking me. But maybe you could just, so can I just, I just want to understand the question. Is the question that somebody who's incarcerated in a facility in Vermont under the Department of Corrections, pretrial detention, you're talking about pretrial detention?
Any stage of the process.
Okay, and if that person is removed from their community where they live, how do they have contact with the people in their community?
Right, so we were discussing earlier about how the internet is not a way to really build trust in community dynamics. And so I feel like, especially since COVID, a lot of prisons have relied, and I know this because I have incarcerated family members in Texas. And so I guess seeing how they think it's a way to replace community building by just, you can call, you can Zoom, whatever. I just don't think that's a good supplement for them. So I just wanted to.
So I think for the judiciary, because the Department of Corrections is an executive branch function, we as a judiciary don't have oversight over their policies. Unfortunately, one of the many horrific consequences of COVID was the isolation, which is even more extreme during COVID than it was even before COVID. To be able to see a client or go in and visit a family member in jail. I mean, certainly as judges, we have trial judges here, and I know when I was a trial judge, I would make a recommendation to Department of Corrections about particular housing or programming, but that was the extent that we could do as a judicial officer, is to make the recommendation. The Department of Corrections was under no obligation to honor our requests. I mean, Judge Valenti and Judge Kalfas and Judge Katie McDonald, they're both here, and maybe you might want to add something?
No, I think you've summed it up from my perspective appropriately. We are very limited in what we can tell the Department of Corrections to do outside of a probation order.
Right, yeah.
Thanks for the question. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So I'm just going to hit on something that was briefly touched on a couple minutes ago. You were talking about data collection, and one of the points that we hit on was finding probable cause. I'm very curious about how you're doing that. Primarily because, oftentimes, and full disclosure, I'm not from Vermont, I'm originally from the city of Baltimore, so there's a jaded perspective that may be behind this, and I fully accept that, but it's a legitimate one. Because if you're relying on finding probable cause and your only mechanism is reaching out to police departments, that data, I would argue, is not reliable. Unless you're talking about something else when you're talking about finding probable cause in your data collection. Can you clarify more what you mean by that?
Well, when finding probable cause, the way our system is set up, and at least the system here in Bennington, is that every week, say it's misdemeanors, someone gets a citation to appear in court on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock. In the week before that, the affidavit of probable cause and the charge from the state's attorney's office goes to the judge for the judge to review to determine whether or not there's sufficient probable cause for the charge that's being alleged.
So you're not discussing probable cause as a problem and have action, an officer's action being brought forward?
No. This is whether or not there's sufficient information within the affidavit itself that would support the charge that the person is being charged with, again, on the misdemeanor. And there'll be certain circumstances where the defense attorneys at the time of arraignment would ask for a second review of the probable cause determination.
So it's an adversary system.
Yeah, I know.
And that's what comes into play. But in the initial, the sworn statement carries a lot of. It's a statement under oath, which is subject to serious consequences if it's not true. Yeah.
And the determination of what the charge is that's specifically made by the state's attorney's office. What charge is available?
So just to summarize, the data would be all coming from, in this case,
law enforcement.
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's
what I'm
right.
trying to get to.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, that's right, that's right.
Do you think that's appropriate all the time? 'Cause that's what I'm trying to lead.
Well, this is subject to the discretion of the judge who the affidavit is presented to.
But if you're just, like, so, backtrack, you're just collecting data on this, I would imagine, like, getting a data pull from one point, especially for something such as this, what I'm worried about is, like, by doing it from one point, there may or may not, in certain circumstances, be an innate bias there.
Right.
You see what I'm getting at?
I see your point, yeah, I see your point. These are things that a judge is going to take into consideration, whether or not there have been problems with the person who is sworn to the facts that are evidenced in the affidavit, whether or not there's been a problem before. That's certainly going to be something that the judge is going to take into account. And as I say, we have an adversary system, which means that what is presented in one case is going to be subject to cross-examination, testing by opposing attorney. And if it turns out it's not true, it will have serious consequences down the road. Do we have any other questions on the internet, please?
We do, just 1 second. Ciamaro Giordano, sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. I'm going to unmute you. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question. Thank you so much.
Okay. It looks like the only other one is Tina Cook. It looks like you have another question. So we unmute you just a second.
I actually think somebody.
Yep, go ahead.
It's Tina again. So I'm very fascinated by the mention of not having people put down their race, because it's true. We do often do that, hoping that we'll avoid discrimination. But like in the home mortgage industry, what they're doing now is they're requiring that observed race be put down, whether it is voluntarily given or not. And that is a way to combat redlining, because what they were saying was that the discrimination was happening anyway, once there was the face-to-face interaction. So
is observed race observed by who? And is that who's observing it? And then how accurate could that be? I mean, there's a lot of.
So if there's some instances where a Black person or a BIPOC person would put down that they're white, because race is often, and gender are, race and ethnicity are often separate, and sometimes they can overlap, but they are two different things. And so
they are two different things. Absolutely.
Exactly. So someone can identify themselves as white, but then they'll be marked down as Black, and then their loan denied.
Well, one of the things that we are going to be tracking is whether or not it's observed or whether or not it's self-reported. And so that's a part of it. And so then we're going to have the data to say, all right, this is an observed race or an observed observation from a third party. And so this is, again, something that it's on our task.
Thanks for the question, the comment. Go ahead.
Just very briefly, thank you for coming today. It's really, really got me thinking about a lot of things. And first of all, one is that for Law Day, I mean, we're losing attorneys here. There's a generational turnover in Bennington County in the last 2 years. We've had 11 go out of practice, 10 because they're retiring and 1 going to the probate court. So we really are going to have a shortage of attorneys, because that 11 people is a significant amount of Bennington County attorneys. So I'm very happy that this court has already contacted the Bar Association about Law Day activities, because I think we can't start too young to let people know that this is an option for a very interesting profession in this area. So certainly I think we should be thinking about how we can be more diverse in the activities that we do on Law Day. That's one thing. And the second thing, I'm wondering just if the court supports or promotes in any way the law office study program. I'm a big supporter of it. I supervise one person. I call it
You
secretly.
want to describe what that is?
Yeah, it's the deal of the century. It's one of 4 states where you can work for an attorney for 4 years, do your own reading and writing of reports, and sit for the bar. And it's just an amazing thing.
So you don't have to go to law school.
You don't go to law
It
school.
takes 4 years.
Yeah, you don't go to law school. It takes a certain, person to do it because you have to be so disciplined to do the reading. But I've had the pleasure of the last 2 or 3 years to read statutes with a few of them in the evenings, and they're amazing people, and to watch them pass the bar. But I think that this is an excellent opportunity for people who may not have such easy access to just be able to give up their productive life and take out big loans and take 2 or 3 years off to go to law school. So I don't know if the judiciary supports the LOS.
Well, yeah,
But I think
it's
it
our
would
rule.
Yeah.
So, but no, and you're right. I didn't realize there were 4 states. I thought there were 2.
California.
California does that?
Yes, California, Vermont. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's Virginia and Washington. Look it up for us, sorry.
But on the law day issue, John Lamson, who was an attorney,
Yes.
he used to do Have Justice Will Travel, which is representing people in restraining orders. He stopped being a lawyer, and he's a teacher at Mount Anthony, and he puts the class together and comes to the courts. And I imagine he still brings his class to the courts.
So it's been modified.
Okay.
Attorney Mansfield will let me know she's
Okay.
actually.
Well, we all, it's a small county, so we talk, and of course, yes, we are. In fact, we're looking in with John into possibly developing a paralegal program. Because we feel like we need it too.
Great.
It just does apply.
And Chief, am I correct? Wasn't Justice Skoglund?
Yeah.
Who read for the bar?
She read for the bar, yeah.
Same with Judge
So one of the Supreme Court justices was.
Yeah.
Well, it's 5:15. And it's snowing. So, we're gonna call it quits, but I wanna thank all of you online and here present as well for participating in this, outreach effort. Please do consider, if you have additional comments, going on our website. You can access it by going to, vermontjudiciary.org. That's, the URL. And anytime, you don't have to do it right now, tomorrow, or in the middle of the night. Many of you are still awake, like I am. Okay, thanks again. Thank you very much. And applause to all of you.